Dating sucks. That much is a universal truth, whether you're straight, gay, cis, trans, non-binary, asexual, allosexual, monogamous, poly, or anything in between all of these. Being single? Great. Being in one or more loving relationships? Also great. But dating? The process of finding that special someone? Hell on earth. Dating sites were meant to facilitate that process, but different people have had different degrees of success with these. But I don't want to get into the myriad of frustrations that I've had with dating apps over the years, or else we'll be here for hours. In this episode of the Anna Marie Criticizes Technology for an Hour podcast, also known as Rule 63, I want to hone in on negative aspects of dating apps that are specific to trans people. For example, did you know that you can get kicked off a dating app just for being trans? It's true, and plenty of trans people have been reporting on this problem for years, with little action from the designers of the apps themselves. Tinder, the dating and hookup app with by far the biggest market share, is infamous in the trans community for banning or shadow banning us. There are also very few apps that even know what to do with non-binary people. In the current year, 2023, lots of apps let you choose between a myriad of different pronoun labels and gender identifiers. But then on the back end, when it comes to their sorting algorithms, they assign you as either male or female, which then dictates who gets shown your profile. If you're trans or non-binary and you don't get any matches no matter how much you swipe, that could be why. With all the transphobia going on in the media and in politics right now, it's a really tough time to be trans in my country. Which is why at the end of the day, most of us just want to come home to a safe and loving partner. Unfortunately, we can't even have that, because most online spaces, just like most real-life spaces, weren't designed with us in mind. When apps are made by and for cis people, trans people are subject to transphobic hate from users, algorithmic bias, content moderation bias, and so much more. Which is why we need apps that are made by and for trans people, so we can feel safe and supported in our journey to find love. But this presents another problem. Who's gonna actually build these apps? How do you make a dating site that's safe and affirming for trans people? How do you handle content moderation or abusive messages at the hands of your user base? And with a community as diverse as ours, how do you make a dating site that accounts for the shifting language of modern trans experience? Luckily, I know just the person who can give us some insight into these questions.
And you also experience a lot of rejection when you do that, because there would be a lot of men who will just assume that you are cis woman, and by the time that you kind of have an idea that he is into you, and once you tell them that you are trans, they're just going to reject you right away just because of that. Not even being polite of saying have a nice day or have a great night and stuff, just immediately, oops, I'm not gay.
Maki Gingoyon is the co-founder of mytransgenderdate.com, the first decent dating site for trans women who are looking for a genuine romantic connection with trans-attracted men. For this episode, I asked her a ton of questions about everything from dating advice to what it's like designing an app aimed at transgender users.
The dating sites back then were designed for the usage of trans women as mere commodity. And he doesn't want that. He wants a woman to be his partner in life. He wants a woman to respect, but then the scenarios and the scenes were very limited. So you were right about it. It was a collaborative effort between me as a trans woman and him as a trans-oriented man.
Even if you're not trans, I hope this episode is enlightening about what kinds of things trans women go through, how cis people and trans people can work together to create trans-friendly spaces and resources, and the basics of design justice philosophy. Welcome, dear viewer, to Rule 63, the trans feminist podcast where we outline the barriers to ending systemic oppression and where we imagine better futures for ourselves. My name is Anna Marie, PhD, and welcome to Rule 63. This episode has a content notice for transphobia. So, a quick disclaimer before we begin. This episode is mostly about trans-inclusive design practices. This is not a dating advice podcast, although you might pick up some useful tidbits about dating along the way. This episode also features a website designed specifically for transgender women who are looking to date men in a romantic, monogamous context. Later on in the episode, we'll go a little bit deeper into how the site handles things like polyamory or other gender combinations, but the main focus here will be straight dating, or straighting, for trans women. If that's what you're into, great, and if not, we hope you stick around. We also won't be slut-shaming any women, nor will we be shaming cis men who are attracted to trans women. We will shame the particular cis men who treat us like garbage because they deserve it, but know that there are men out there who are genuine in their attraction to trans women, and who do treat us with respect. I know that being told not all men kind of feels like being forced to play Russian roulette and then being told, it's okay, not all of the chambers have bullets in them. But trust us, we're going somewhere with this. Let's dig into what makes dating as a trans woman so difficult. First, like I said up top, the apps were not designed for us. I asked my followers over on TikTok and Instagram, @thatannamarie, about their experiences with dating apps, and many of them have reported getting banned from dating sites altogether. So how does that happen? Well, it has to do with the combination of transphobic users and bad site design. Let's talk about Tinder, since it seems to be the main offender. If you didn't know, Tinder is the app that popularized the swipe mechanic now ubiquitous on most dating apps. An algorithm presents you with a profile, usually made up with someone's name, pictures, and self-description, which you can read through and either swipe left for no, or swipe right to try and match with a given user. If you and another user both swipe right on each other, you can get chatting, or whatever it is you freaks do. Listen, I know this is the most asexual way of explaining dating sites that you've ever heard, but stick with me here. This techie stuff is important. The app's algorithm also shows your profile to other users, although Tinder and other apps like it are pretty hush-hush about how this sorting algorithm works. In other words, if there are 1,000 people in your search radius and you only get a certain number of swipes per day, how does it decide which profiles get to the top of your feed? And how does it decide whether to show your profile to other users' feeds? That process is kind of opaque, and lots of trans people have claimed that somewhere in the mix, transphobia is entering the picture and ruining their in-app experience. Here's how we think that goes down. Let's say you're a transgender woman. How lucky you are. Thousands of years ago, you would have been worshipped as a goddess, and now you're on your lunch break scrutinizing profiles of men holding up fish between shifts at a soul-sucking job under capitalism, just to find someone who will love you and cherish you as you are. Somewhere across town, a user on the site is swiping through profiles and then comes across yours. Either he reads that you're trans because that's what you wrote in your profile, or he clocks you as trans from your pictures, or you both match and then get talking and then you disclose that you're trans. That user, struck by either an inability to cope with his own attraction to you or simply sheer disgust for what you are, hits the report button on your profile. After all, he thinks that he's been deceived, tricked somehow. And maybe there's no helping that. Maybe there will always be people in this world who don't see us as the goddesses we are. But the truly shameful thing, the thing that can be avoided and accounted for, is that the app agrees with him. Because of this one man, or perhaps the aggregate of several men doing this to your profile in a similar fashion, you one day find that you've been banned from Tinder entirely, all for doing nothing but existing. What's happened here, and what's happened to thousands of other trans women before you, is that the app's content moderation system is being leveraged against the users it's supposed to protect. In theory, the report button on dating apps is supposed to exist to let the app's moderators know that someone is harassing you or otherwise being toxic on the platform, so that they can get booted off the site. But when transphobic users report trans users, either an algorithm or a person or both is deciding that being trans isn't allowed on the platform. It's a reflection of the harmful stereotype that trans women are tricksters, succubi, demons incarnate, except this time being written directly into the code of the app. In some cases, the app even directly tells you that the reason you're getting kicked off is because you're, quote, impersonating women. And that basically says it all. Friend of the show and legendary influencer Lauren Sundstrom even shared with me that she'd recently been shadow banned on Tinder. We here at Rule 63 talked about the concept of shadow banning on the TikTok episode of this show, but in a dating app context, that basically means that Lauren's profile isn't being shown to any other users. She can swipe right as much as she wants, but she gets 0 matches. Also, friend of the show, actor and advocate Maybe Burke was kicked off of Grindr twice for impersonating friend of the show, actor and advocate Maybe Burke, but that may be its own special case. This de facto ban on trans users was a pretty big news story among the community a few years ago, but despite Tinder claiming that it fixed the problem in 2019, many trans users saw no change in the platform and are still struggling with the app to this day. The problem goes deeper than content moderation, too. A lot of what makes a particular dating app welcoming or unwelcoming to trans people is the culture of the app. What is the user base like, and how are they encouraged to act on the platform? This is something that's a bit harder for developers to control since you can't handpick who uses your dating app. But there are things that dating site companies can do, from the features that their app offers to how it's marketed. Apps like Lex, Her, and Tammy are specifically marketed to queer people, and Her lets you add a trans pride sticker to your profile, a feature which helps to normalize trans inclusion on the app. Some apps require you to put your pronouns as a distinct section in your bio, whereas others, like conservative dating app The Right Stuff, have explicitly marketed their app as not having that feature. Yeah, probably not a great site for a trans person. The point is, there are little things you can do to attract a specific demographic of users to your site, and to turn away those who might be less trans-friendly. Side note, according to my followers, some of the best apps to use as a trans person, at least here in the US, are Lex, Her, OkCupid, Bumble, Feld, and Tammy. So go try those out, and you're welcome. So let's talk about the types of men that these dating apps do tend to attract. Maki, our guest, was around in the trans dating scene as far back as 2008, where the only way to find love as a trans woman was through the online gay dating scene.
I started to go online, and the only online dating scene at that time that is meant for relationship was gay dating scene. And unfortunately, we were considered as gay at that time, effeminate gay. I cannot forget a category in that online dating online dating site rather. It states effeminate male. So there was no transgender. Now, if I'm going to open for a transgender dating site, sadly, with all due respect to those people who have created it, probably out of, I have no clue what is their purpose, but the transgender dating scene specifically you're going to open are more leaning to the adult scene, which were pornography and escorting. But just to be clear, I have nothing against our trans sisters who are in the adult industry. But for someone who is trying to find a serious relationship, it was difficult because when you log into these sites, majority of these men are seeing you as mere fetish. So it feels like hopeless at that time to find someone serious.
Even to this day, a lot of men see trans women as just a fetish or a dirty little secret that needs to be kept away from the waking world. This mentality happens to be at the heart of the anti-trans violence we see across the country and all over the world. Cis men are attracted to us. They know that we're trans and they fuck us or love us in private. But when it comes time to face the ridicule of their shitty friends who want to shame them for, big air quotes here, being gay, because what could be gayer than a man loving a woman, some men would literally rather murder us than have to deal with a fraction of what we have to go through. Now, obviously, not all men are murderers. Some are just assholes. Chasers is a broad term invented by the trans femme community to describe cis men who chase after trans women, usually only doing so in private.
If you're going to find someone nice, it's going to be a great conversation, exchange of 4 messages, and then after that, can I see your private parts? How big is your private parts? That is completely understandable, but you can't just bring that up on the first few conversations. I mean, it's just off for me personally when you like, what is the color of that thing down there? Has it already been removed? Have you already have your breast augmentation and stuff like that? I'm like, that's not really what I'm going through right now. Am I talking to a doctor or what? Because I'm looking for someone to accept me and go through with my transitioning. So it was horrible. Dating scene back then was difficult.
I truly can't stress enough just how much cis men are one of the biggest threats to trans women's safety. When we say protect trans women, especially black and brown trans women, this is what we mean. I should also use this opportunity to state that if your city or state doesn't have a law on the books about the trans panic defense, the legal loophole that lets chasers literally get away with murder, that's a tangible policy goal that anyone can fight for. And if you can, you should. But okay, this is not the dunk on men hour. We are intersectional feminists here. We recognize that men are not intrinsically inherently terrible just because they're men. This specific cocktail of transphobia, homophobia, and misogyny is forced onto all of us from birth. Even trans people are transphobic, from the media we consume to the laws we operate under. What about cis men who are genuinely nice and treat trans women with respect and care? Well, to be fair and balanced, cis guys can have it hard too. In fact, cis men who date trans women are often heavily stigmatized, and that experience can't be ignored either.
Which is a common issue among trans-oriented men, being rejected by their friends and family just because they are attracted to a trans woman. And for friends, especially among men, there is some sort of difficulties of accepting who you truly wanted to love when you are in a masculine culture.
You may have heard us throw around the term trans-oriented man already in this episode. This is a term that Maki and her team came up with to expand on the now common Western notion of a trans-attracted man.
Thanks for bringing that up. It's actually a term on our site that we use that defines men who are attracted to trans women, but with more in-depth attraction, not just attraction per se. It's more like you are already aware of transgender issues. You're already aware, not necessarily you're not a first timer, not necessarily that you have already experienced being with a trans woman, but more like you already have knowledge of what a transgender woman experience in her life.
Basically, there's being attracted to trans women, and then there's going out of your way to learn about trans issues and how you can be the best romantic partner you can possibly be for a trans woman. Because if you're going to love someone, wouldn't you want to go out of your way to learn about them and what they go through?
If you want to date somebody, you should know their history in the first place. You can't just randomly ask and so why did you transition? Are you here to interview me, or are you here to make me fall in love with you? What? Please make yourself clear. So that's why we use the trans-oriented men, because we also wanted to psychologically prepare our men that you should be prepared when you date trans women.
The liberation of trans women and the liberation of men are bound up in one another. And it's this understanding that trans-oriented cis men are out there and want the same thing as trans women, to find the perfect partner, that formed the basis for the design of Maki's website, mytransgenderdate.com.
That's why it's very important to be hands-on for both of us, to create rules, to create the site itself. I have already received a lot of emails why we're so hands-on, because nobody understands it better than we do. So we're not after for quantity. We really are after for quality, because there's 1% of the population in the whole world are trans people, and we can't even make that right. So we're taking the risk. We're taking our chances.
Yeah.
So you were right about it. It was a collaborative effort between me as a trans woman and him as a trans-oriented man.
At first, the idea for the website came from Maki's partner at the time, who would go on to become her business partner.
We were in a relationship at that time, and he was like, I thought he was going to propose to me, actually, because he was so serious. Apparently he's proposing a business plan, and I'm like, what? I thought you were going to give me a ring. I was just kidding.
Being an activist, Maki was skeptical at first, especially given what trans women typically go through with cis men. But after giving it some thought and after asserting herself a little bit, she was able to help grow the site into what it is today.
Yeah, he proposed to me that we are going to create a dating site. And my first response was like, no, why would I do that? From my experience, I was assuming and I was being judgmental towards him and said, you guys were just creating trans women as a mode of commodity. You guys were selling us. You guys you were presenting us as sexual fetish. Why would I do that? I mean, I'm a trans woman. Why would I sell my sisters into this site just for money? I'm not. No, I have no idea what social media marketing is. I have no idea what a business plan is. I don't know. I don't have any idea what entrepreneurship was. Zero clue. But then he was so serious in presenting the idea of making a change into the dating scene. And I was already active in activism at that time. When I was in college, I ran for a student council and fight for LGBTIQ rights in our school. So it was just in me. And as an activist, you're always reluctant when when your name and your reputation, your identity is at risk. But then I took the risk because maybe this is a way of activism too. He presented to me so many ideas, and I'm like, okay, let's do this, but let's do it my way. And so we agreed, and my transgender date was born 10 years ago.
So, without further ado, let's get into today's case study in trans-inclusive design and how Maki's site actually works. First of all, the team at mytransgenderdate.com is made up of a mix of trans women and cis men who may or may not identify as trans-oriented. And perhaps most importantly, the site has a content moderation team made up of 100% trans women.
As the head of the operations, under my team, we're all trans women. And now we have like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 trans women in the team, 11 including me, and 12 including the writer.
It turns out that the best way to keep trans women safe is to put trans women in charge of keeping them safe. Who would have thought? Maki's team of 12 trans women, all based in the Philippines since that's where their HQ is, spend all day reading user profiles and making sure that men aren't being creepy to trans women, and vice versa. That way, when a user hits the report button on another user, it goes to a trans woman for review.
So moderators review the profiles and maintain the quality of the site. That's what moderators do. And who better do it than trans women themselves or ourselves? If somebody is just being abusive towards a trans woman, immediately another trans woman could tell. And if a transgender woman is not, if a trans woman is not just doing it or is not using the site properly, we could immediately find a way on understanding where she is coming from because we are trans women ourselves.
To help the human team, there's also a bot that's able to flag keywords as being inappropriate. But this algorithm, this computer, has no power to ban users. It only notifies the team of ladies so that they can take a closer look at what's going on.
We don't judge right away. We give always the benefit of the doubt. So it was really imprinted on our brains when we started the site that once we need help, the first person that we will be asking help for is another trans woman.
It's thanks to this team of moderators and the culture of the site that users don't get kicked off the site just for being trans. Also, users don't get kicked off just for being sex workers, which happens on a lot of other dating sites because it's assumed that those users are soliciting their services.
But everyone deserves to find love and relationship. And I get this a lot, especially from men, although I understand where they're coming from. They always complain about possible sex workers and escorts on our site. We do not discriminate anybody based on their jobs or how they manage to get an income. We do accept whoever you are, whatever type of jobs you have, as long as you're not going to use our site for the purpose of you looking for clients if you are an escort or offering services if you are in the adult industry. So sex work is real work for me. And I would like also to tell everybody that even if a person who is doing sex work, I think they all deserve to find love if at some point they wanted to find love.
The site is also inclusive of polyamorous relationships, but they are careful with profiles that are explicitly fetishizing to trans women. Case in point, while the site is open to those seeking polyamorous and open relationships, the site tends to ban unicorn hunters, which is where a couple is looking for a trans woman to be their third.
So that's also one of the things that we are trying to protect from especially trans women, because we have a lot of sign-ups from couples who create a profile and they want another person in their team. We do respect that. However, it makes the dating amongst trans women complicated. Immediately, the recipient of that kind of relationship would feel they are just a fetish, and we don't want them to feel that. Although I understand that there are couples would justify that they are not only looking for that, which I also respect and which I understand, but we're just really being careful and sensitive towards trans women. And so we don't allow couples searching for a third party, but we do allow who are those in a relationship who would like to be in an open relationship with someone. I don't think there is really a perfect approach to it, but it's already good enough that we are being honest that we don't really want trans women to be only seen as fetish, regardless of what type of relationship you are into. Maybe you're single, married, or whatnot. That's the whole idea of creating a safe space, especially for trans women, because let's just admit that trans women have really a traumatizing experience when it comes to finding love and relationship.
Another big feature of the site is that trans women don't have to pay to use the service, but cis men do. The most basic membership for cis men who want to message trans ladies is $25 a month. At first, this might seem unfair, but if you think about it, it's actually pretty equitable. I'll let Maki explain it.
Trans women can use the site for free. Hello, girl, sign up now. It's so free. But for men, this might sound sexist. Man needs to pay in order to start exchanging messages to trans women. People might be questioning, yes, people might see me as sexist for having that. But no, as what I've mentioned earlier, I've used, there are a lot of transgender women who cannot find a job easily. Not even trans women can live their lives authentically, how much more find a job. And transitioning is not free for everybody, although transitioning is not mandatory and transitioning is not for everybody as well. But if a trans woman opted to transition, not everyone could afford it. So if we if we're going to let trans women pay on our side, will there be a single trans woman be on our side? I don't think so. Like, coming from a trans woman myself as a working class, why would I pay something that I don't even know if I will have hope, if I will find something? I'd just rather probably buy my daily hormones or monthly hormones for it.
Cis men are typically, though not always, the ones that enact harm onto trans women. Also, trans women are typically, though not always, economically marginalized in society, being pushed out of jobs for their identity and having to pay for hormones, doctor's appointments, therapy, and surgeries that most cis people don't need. When taking into consideration all the things trans women go through, especially trans women who date men who, in my opinion, are braver than the US Marines, asking men to pay to talk to us is a fair ask. There are other quality of life features that make the site an inclusive and welcoming space. Trans users can denote whether they're pre-op, post-op, or non-op in their profiles, and Maki and the other co-founder have profiles on the site, which fosters a sense that the creators of the app truly care about creating a positive culture within the site. The site recently launched its new verification feature, so you know you're not getting catfished, and I've been told that in a few weeks the site will be launching its own mobile app. Yes, you have to go on a proper computer to use the site as it is now. Finding the love of your life takes work. The site even runs a blog with dating advice featuring contributions from both the ladies and the men on the site team, making it not only a dating site, but an educational space for everyone involved.
To be honest, I really don't know how to tell men easily that trans women are women, and women and trans women deserves to be respected like any other women. However, the best way that we could do it is through our platform itself. That's why it's very important for us to find opportunities where we could inject informations that are both educational and helpful for them as a human being and as someone who are pushing into who are looking to date trans women. Education is a vital role in understanding the person that you wanted to date with. And if a platform who offers a dating space and lack of education, you're missing the whole picture. Because that is what I see as a co-founder of a dating site. You should leverage on your platform to help others understand themselves, probably their attraction to somebody, and also the dating culture that they are into. Because it's a funny question. Men ask me, how do I treat a trans woman? I'm so attracted with her. I don't know. Do you think should you treat her like a dog? I think you should treat her like a human being. She's a human being after all.
But it wasn't easy making an app that appeals to the trans community. In fact, there are lots of complications that come up when you're designing for an international community with ever-shifting language. When we come back from a short break, we're going to take this conversation a bit deeper to talk about some of the challenges Maki and her team faced making their trans-friendly dating site. Rule 63 is independently funded and brought to you in part by listeners like you. If you like what you're hearing and want to hear even more sweet content from me, Anna Marie, and my co-producer Danny, you can give us just a couple of dollars a month on Patreon to get access to bonus content. Included in that content is the full uncut interview with every guest we've ever had on the show, including my nearly 2-hour conversation with Maki used in this very episode. If you've been on the fence about supporting the show financially, it only gets better with every episode. If this sounds fun to you, or if you just want to support the show out of the goodness of your own heart, head on over to patreon.com/rule63. That's patreon.com/RULE63. The link is in the show notes. Thanks so much. Now let's get back to the show. There's no getting around the fact that inclusive design takes work. It makes sense that there's so many dating apps that don't cater to the needs of diverse people. Taking time to accommodate a niche subset of dating culture, like cis men dating trans women, requires a lot of resources, not just to understand that culture, but to design and test technologies that adequately serve those needs. My transgender date is a good example of this, since they've had to tackle a lot of complex problems during development. How do you serve a community as diverse as trans people? How do you make sure that they feel as safe as possible on a site specifically meant for sending vulnerable and sometimes spicy messages to complete strangers? Let's start with site moderation. I mentioned before that the team of moderators consists of 12 trans women, and trust me, those ladies work hard.
To describe you in one word, it's draining every day because they are manually reviewing and reading profiles every day. All the informations are read manually by our moderators, and we have like thousands of profiles coming in.
The site's content moderation team has to read through the profiles of all the users on the site to make sure that nothing salacious, offensive, or abusive is being written there. They also have to sift through DMs that were reported to them by the site's users, and sometimes even inappropriate pictures.
Sometimes bad, sometimes shitty description, sometimes out of this world description. And I'm just talking about the description. How about the photos? Photos that are not really pleasant, photos that are too sexual. If you're going to do this in an hour, it's fine. But if you're going to repetitively do this for this next 6 hours, it's draining. And it's also mentally challenging because you keep on having those images. You go through all those things. So, yeah, every day for our moderators is draining. It's consuming them inside.
And if that wasn't difficult enough, these moderators often have to make a judgment call as to whether something is offensive or worth kicking someone off the site. A lot of these cases are pretty clear-cut, but others are in a gray area, and this can lead to a lot of disagreements among the team.
I could only imagine how terrifying it is to visit our office because we will be arguing like, why did you do this? Why did you do that? What you have to go through the messages and really you can't just judge because of that context. You can't just take it out of context. No, you have to read everything before you judge it. So I think it's going to be a noisy office, but fun because we're all trans women. Yeah. For spicy things like being naughty, I always remind our staff that, come on, guys, we're a dating site. We're a place where people wanted to have a romantic relationship. So obviously spicing things up, making it naughty is part of it, as long as it's consensual. If it's not, that's where we have a problem.
Even among a group as small as 12 Filipino trans women, there can be heated disagreements about what kinds of messages are fine and which go too far. So imagine trying to scale this to a site like Tinder, which has nearly 8 million users in the United States alone. I imagine they would have to hire a lot of trans people to make their app even a fraction as trans inclusive as Maki's. That isn't to say that they shouldn't try, but still. I want to say here that Maki's site moderators are very well compensated for their hard work, and despite seeing a lot of hot garbage every day, they do find the work fulfilling since they get to help other trans women every day.
Surprisingly, every time I have a meeting with them, they are just so genuinely grateful for the opportunity to help other trans women. I'm like, I want to cry when you say that because I am not really even thinking of it. Although, yes, every time I interview you, it's very important that you have those communal purposes to help others. But I just didn't realize that you really bring it up to your work. You wanted trans women to be safe. You wanted trans-oriented men to be safe while they are looking for someone to love. And I'm like, we are making something here. I'm not just because I always think that I always make sure, and this is always what I remind my partner is that there's so many trans women who are economically disadvantaged and I want them to be very well compensated. Yes, they are very well compensated. But on top of that, they just find the purpose and the joy of helping others. I know it sounded like a cliche, and I know it sounded like too much or emotional, but that's what they said. And I'm just blown away. I'm like, oh, girls, come on, don't make me cry. It's a weekly meeting. It's a weekly report. Let's not do that. But yeah.
This shows that inclusive design isn't just about hiring any trans person. It's about hiring trans people who are themselves invested in the work being done, and who have the unique experiences needed to make the tough calls that a cis person could never make. Sometimes, only a trans person can truly tell when something is transphobic. Also, pay them handsomely for their services. That's another important thing of inclusive design. Another interesting part of the site is language. The language used by the trans community is ever-shifting, and different trans subcultures may use words differently. Even the term transgender, which is currently used in the West as an umbrella term for our community as a whole, is often placed in opposition to things like trans with an asterisk, transsexual, or even terms that others might find fetishizing or outdated, like transvestite or trap. Maki's site actually serves as an interesting case study in this problem. Let's throw it back to 2013, when Maki's partner first pitched the idea for the site.
So he named the site myladyboydate.com. And I'm like, I thought we're going to do this my way. But then he explained to me the business side of keywords and the logistics of using terminologies that would just make our site jump into the online scene or in the search engine, if that's the search engine is really the SEO part is the reason why we're using it.
The term ladyboy is used in Southeast Asia to describe who we in the West might call transgender women, but also can extend to effeminate gay men or intersex people who are assigned male at birth. While many trans women identify with the term ladyboy, others regard it to be essentially a porn term, or a term used by Western tourists. Either way, it's seen by many as derogatory and inappropriate to use, especially if you're not from that culture.
As an activist, I was really, really mad about that term. And as we continuously argue about this terminology, I've come to realize that there's just so many dynamics when we refer trans women. And apparently it was okay back then for trans women to call themselves ladyboy because it's really just a simple way of describing ourselves. And nobody ever seen that as derogatory. Sadly, I don't know who brought it from Asia to the West and use it to name porn sites like that and make it really more sexual and fetishizing the term. But in Asia, especially in Thailand, there was no term like transgender. It was a way to easily let people understand our real identity, that we were born male and we identify as a woman. That's why it was a ladyboy. It was nothing to do with what's between our legs, really. So I've learned that part and I'm like, that is very true. Like we're not native English speakers. We're trying to translate our own language to the English speaking people so they would understand and they wouldn't be telling us that we're lying or deceiving them.
The actual gender traditions in play here can be traced back to Buddhism, which recognizes 4 genders including men, women, and gatui, with gatui increasingly becoming the term used by trans women across Southeast Asia, though not always. Again, like we discussed a couple episodes ago, the Western concept of transness doesn't map 100% onto other cultures, and the lines between trans woman, gay man, and intersex person can get blurry. I recommend reading more about Katui from actual Katui people. We've put some links in the episode description to read more. For now, though, just know that the term has been controversial for many years. But when the site was first founded, Maki's cis-male co-founder convinced her to call the site myladyboi.date.com, basically as a marketing tactic, since that was probably the search term used by the men who might become the site's users. Running a small business, there's always that tension between using the best, most inclusive terms for your audience and using more broadly used terms in order to attract an audience in the first place. Your site can be the most perfect, inclusive space, but if no one is using it, you're not necessarily achieving your mission. So, the site used the term ladyboy across the world until a few years later when Maki changed the name of the site for the Western market.
So I finally made a win with my partner to change my ladyboy date to my transsexual date. And the reason for the change was we wanted to be more open to the Western world.
Interestingly, while a lot of people supported the name change, others protested, including some trans women who identified with the term ladyboy.
There were people who like it. There were also people who did not like it. But overall, it was received fairly okay to the world. And just recently, in last year, I finally made my breakthrough to term the dating site mytransgenderdate.com. And I have been telling my partner, I told you we should have done this before and stuff like that. But then also I got reminded of the evolution of the term, and we really want our website to be inclusive. We wanted our website to be welcoming to everyone under the umbrella term of transgender. When we switch my transgender date from my transsexual date, we also receive a lot of negative comments because surprisingly, like even me, I really wish, and I'm going to help you have this podcast, make this podcast really accessible even to cis people, because even in our trans community, even in our own community, we are having a hard time being together. We all have differences and we all learn. It's not just that because you're in the transgender community, you should learn it right away. So we are also changing. We are also evolving even within our community. And my point is, even when we change my transgender date, we receive negative feedbacks from people who did not identify themselves as transgender and wanted to remain to be labeled as transsexual. And I was surprised. And then I had an in-depth research and I'm like, okay, I get you. I understand.
Whether it's not wanting to submit to Western terms for your identity or not wanting to be identified with medical terminology for your deeply held spiritual experience of gender, trans people care a lot about the terms that are used for ourselves. As we should. We are constantly having other people choose names for us, and we have little power in this world to decide for ourselves what we get to be called and how we get to be represented.
And we found out that I think transgender is more internationally accepted as an umbrella term. To go a little bit in depth, we wanted also to use the transgender term because not everyone undergoes gender reassignment surgery, and maybe they're not comfortable really of identifying themselves as transsexual. So to each is their own. I think the transgender umbrella term just compasses of most of us.
Even the Western concept of being transgender should be held under the microscope. Why are cis people considered the default while trans people are considered some deviation from the norm? What if, in reality, trans and non-binary are the default, and we should all be forging our own unique gender identities, and cis people are the weird ones just for sticking to what was assigned to them at birth? What if, in a fully equitable utopian society, there was no such thing as gender at all, and everyone just presented in the way that makes them happy without expectation of being treated differently for it? A girl can dream, right? For now, we need to play with the hand that we were dealt. And so, Maki and her team are currently in the process of switching their branding to My Transgender Date worldwide. Who knew that one word could cause so much controversy? And remember that this is just the name of the site. Other features of the site still need to be worked on with international audiences in mind.
The transgender term is only more focused on the English speaking countries. We even haven't touched on non-English speaking countries in Asia, like for example, Thailand. Well, yes, they do use transgender, but then in their local terms, they have different ones. Sao Puppet Song, which is more like of a second type of woman. For all our Thai listeners, forgive me of how I pronounce that. There's some accent there. For Indonesia, they have Waria. For India, they have the transgender people, and they also have the Hijra. And even in the Latin speaking or Spanish speaking countries, there is this debate among trans activists of calling trans women transgénero because the term transgénero refers to it's a male term. It's a male. So they are all having this variety of terminologies, which as someone who created a website internationally, it's so difficult to draw the line.
A lazier developer would have just thrown their site language into Google Translate and called it a day. But like we just discussed with the term ladyboy, some terms have complex histories and competing interpretations even among the trans community, and you need to make sure that you're not using fetishizing language for trans women on your own site. Maki's site is currently getting around this problem by having translators for every region they service, which is an expensive and time-consuming ordeal, but well worth the effort to ensure that the site stays trans-inclusive no matter where you're using it from.
Yes, we do. We're so lucky to have translators who are also in the LGBTIQ community, but not all of them. So there are some instances where a challenge could be letting the translator understand of where we are coming from, because it might be taken out of context, because all of our pieces are basically based in English. So there might be like a mistranslation if a translator don't understand really the whole idea of the dating site. So it's really important for us that a translator is open, is accommodating, and is just sensitive and have an idea about the transgender world.
Speaking of understanding a dating culture that isn't your own, let's talk about the elephant in the room. What about other combinations of genders and sexualities? What about trans men who want to date cis women? What about non-binary people who want a site just for them? What about a site exclusively for trans or T for T dating? Are there any plans to expand My Transgender Date to include more dating options, such as trans women who want to meet other trans women?
It's in line with the work ethics of my partner. And also, I have learned how important it is to focus into a single niche in order to give a quality dating site.
Right now, Maki and her team are sticking to what they know. As the site is set up right now, trans women can only view the profiles of the men, and vice versa. Maki is very much interested in expanding the site to serve bi and lesbian trans women, but before changing up their site in such a way that trans women can match with other trans women, they really want to understand T for T dating culture.
I see it as an opportunity to help and expand the site, but I also am like my partner who doesn't want to offer half-baked websites or half-baked projects. I don't want to assume that I understand trans lesbian dating the way I understand straight trans dating. I don't want to assume that it's the same with trans women who are bisexuals. There are nuances that I don't know that is very important for trans women who have different sexual orientations. And I don't want to break their heart. I don't want to disappoint them because I should know better.
Having used terrible dating sites for themselves, they really want to get it right by collaborating with T for T people so they aren't subjected to the same bad design that they were subjected to by the cis world. Empathy in 2023? Crazy. They also need to keep their core user base in mind before opening the floodgates to all kinds of dating preferences. Remember that as it's currently set up, men have to pay $25 a month to match with trans women who might be interested in them. If you were a man and you were paying that much, and suddenly you started seeing a bunch of profiles of trans women who weren't interested in men, you would probably get pretty frustrated. You would think that expanding this app to other gender identities was as simple as letting people check a box at sign up, but that's really not the case.
It's really about, I think it all boils down to our ethics and to our purpose of the site. If our purpose is just really for money, then yeah, why not? Why not open to everybody? But we're more focused on making a safe space for everybody while also we are benefiting from it money-wise. Why do we have to compromise it? We've been on that road already. I have already experienced those types of dating sites. So why would we do it now? Why we do it on our side?
I wanted to talk about mytransgenderdate.com, not because I use the site and I love it. I actually am a trans lesbian myself, but because I think this story can serve as a great example for what sort of things that developers should consider when designing a site for trans people. It takes a lot of effort to serve a population as diverse, but also niche as trans people, and sometimes to make a space trans inclusive, you need to consider aspects as fundamental as who has to pay for the service and how much. And even though most products on the market want to target as wide of a demographic as possible, it's okay to get a little niche and focus on one specific problem, like finding respectable guys for trans women. You should also be co-designing apps with trans people, not for trans people. Design justice is a body of ideas that states, among other things, that designers of a technology should center the voices of those who are directly impacted by the outcomes of the design process, and should prioritize the design's impact on the community over the intentions of the designer. I'll put some resources about design justice in the description as well. All of these principles apply to making a space, either online or IRL, that's not just inclusive of trans people, but one that centers justice and equity. When talking with Maki, I was struck by just how proud she was of everyone on her team. Not just the trans women on the moderation team, but everyone involved, including the cis men and women who helped make her idea a reality. Seriously, she did a shout out during the interview several times. It was adorable.
But there they are. They're just like happy with their purpose. So shout out to all my girls if once you're listening to this. And that's only the moderator side. I am surprised with non-trans women and non-transgender people on our side, they also blow my mind. Shout out to my app guy.
To me, the best part about designing technology using design justice principles is that everyone walks away from the process having learned something about one another. In the process of designing a site that serves trans women, even cis men who aren't trans attracted can become more educated, well-rounded people.
To be honest, Anna, I wasn't really expecting that this is going to be the impact of it, because again, as an activist, I was also leveraging on this project to push through my activism, which is to educate people about transgender women. And now it just evolves. I wanted to focus more on stopping the stigma of transgender relationship. But then I didn't realize that at the back office, there were also people learning from what I am doing and spreading the word in their own way by their friends of friends and friends. And it's a domino effect that I couldn't even measure. So I'm just really happy of the small impact that I am even putting to my colleagues. And also by educating, especially trans-oriented men, by educating them, by telling them stories about the struggles of trans women, I think it would help. I think it's the same effect that I have with my staff who are cis men and not attracted to trans women. Once they understand the struggles and stories of trans women, they start to understand, and they are not afraid in sharing what they have learned to other people. So it's like a domino effect. Once you start sharing, once you start educating, somehow you are already empowering them to be also an educator themselves and spread the word. I think it's a long-term goal, but I hope that our site has an effect on it. And being visible is really, really important.
In an era of content suppression and worldwide transphobia, Maki and her team are imagining a better internet for trans people, and I think that's special. Because trans people deserve not only better dating apps, but trans people deserve love. We deserve to be seen and valued and appreciated and held and cared for. Anything that goes into making that happen is beautiful in my book. The world is changing, and as trans people gain more acceptance, we're also facing a lot of backlash in response to that acceptance. As we can tell from the Pornhub 2022 Year in Review, which showed that transgender was a top search term among both men and women, lots of cis people are interested in learning more about us, and even dating us. So creating safe educational spaces for them to do that is critical. We just need to make sure that those spaces are designed by trans people and not people who want to exploit us for a quick buck. This Valentine's Day, I hope you take some time to appreciate the loved ones in your own life, romantic or not, and remember that when cis people and trans people work together, there's nothing we can't accomplish.
10 years ago, there are very few profiles of men who have photos on it. And I am so proud that on our site, they feel so safe that they are willing to put up photo. They are not afraid to show who they are just because they're attracted to trans women. So there are profiles back then where there's no photo at all, or a photo of somebody else. But right now, there's just, at least based on our site, on my site, there are a lot of young men who are attracted to trans women who just put up their profile, genuinely looking for love and relationship. They're not really afraid. So I get jealous of the new generation, to be honest, but at least we made some impact to them. So That's what we're holding on to.
Hi, thanks so much for listening to this episode. If you like what you heard, please subscribe to us on Spotify, YouTube, or Apple Podcasts. It helps with the almighty algorithm if you leave us a review, and share this episode with a few people who might like it. If you really like what you heard, consider becoming a Patreon supporter at patreon.com/RULE63, where you can get access to bonus content. This is basically the season 3 finale of the show, so Danny and I will probably do a big live stream very soon, where patrons will get to talk about this season with us, so stay tuned for that. Also up on Patreon right now are the full uncut interviews with all our past guests, including my chat with Maki, which includes a lot of stuff that did not make it into this episode. Here's a preview. I was going to ask, what are your favorite parts about being trans, or what brings you the most trans joy? You touched on that a little bit with the communal aspect, but is there anything else that comes to mind?
I can't get pregnant. Is that okay to say? I mean, I'm sorry for all my cis women friends.
Don't forget to connect with our gorgeous guest over on social media. Also, the My Transgender Date TikTok and Instagram pages just started posting dating advice, Q&As with Maki, and lots of other goodies. Okay, that's all for now. I will see you all eventually with a new Rule 63 episode. Bye!